Welcome to Just SAFCEI, the Climate Justice Sessions. My name is Sintle Nal, and on the special episode we're joined by Ntombizodidi Mapapu, who is a Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, SAFCEI, program lead for energy and climate justice. We're talking about mobilizing faith communities for a just energy transition. What is the role of religious organizations and faith-based organizations in promulgating and promoting climate justice, but also supporting communities that are mobilizing for climate action? Join us on this exciting episode as we unpack all things faith, religion, and climate justice. Ntombi, thank you so much for joining us on Just SAFCEI. How are you feeling today?
Feeling well, feeling good, a bit tired, but glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. We've got such an interesting topic today. The notion around religion and faith also intersecting with climate justice. And I wonder, for the benefit of myself and our communities really, can you tell us a bit more about the work that SAFCEI does, why it does it, and why it's important?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having us at SAFCEI. So SAFCEI started in 2005 after a convention, multi-faith convention, where Bishop Jeff Davis and also Kate Davis had a conviction that they needed to establish an institution that speaks to environmental issues, and that's how SAFCEI came into being. It mobilized faith communities as a multi-faith organization to ensure that issues around climate, around food, around animal justice are issues that are championed by faith leaders, and that faith leaders are in the forefront of speaking out against unethical practices in this space and calling for justice related to food, climate, as well as animals. And those are the three programs that we run at SAFCEI. So thank you for the question. It's very important to understand where we come from as an organization, where we are. And we've just celebrated our 20th anniversary as an organization.
So 20 years as an organization, what does that look like? Is it multi-denominational, or are there specific religions that you guys are affiliated to, or is it all-encompassing?
All-encompassing. We're a multi-faith organization. We work with all faiths, and as our executive director, Francesca de Gasperis, likes saying, all faiths and none. So we work with Christians, Buddhists, we work with the Islamic faith, we work with African religion that includes traditional leaders, and it also includes traditional leaders and also includes the African religious communities. So we're a multi-faith organization that works in this space, and we're proud to be such. So that means that we're not exclusionary. We include our voices, but we also want to drive an agenda around environmental justice, eco-justice with faith leaders from across the spectrum. And that's why we call ourselves Earth Keepers.
Okay.
And we've been building a network across the region of Earth Keepers. So as SAFCEI, we work across the region. So we're not only working in South Africa, we work in Zambia, we work in Namibia, we work in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, we work in Mozambique as well, Eswatini and Lesotho. So, and we're hoping that in the next 20 years we'll have a continental footprint and having a network of faith leaders that are advocating for environmental justice.
I mean, it's exciting work because for, the average person, including myself, I was just so fascinated about the role of religion and faith and spirituality, again, meeting climate justice and climate action. But from a practical standpoint, how do you mobilize communities and, religious groups around climate justice, the just energy transition, and environmental issues? How does that work take place? Is it based at a church level, or is it regular community engagements that are also based on faith?
We are an organization that works across the region. We are a network of faith leaders, and our mobilizing is anchored on our key program called the Faith Leaders Environmental Advocacy Training Program, which trains faith leaders and green champions around environmental justice issues, from climate change to food to animal justice. And at the moment, we're currently hosting one in Rosettenville called the Regional Women's Fleet 3. This is our third cohort, and we've got women faith leaders from Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, and South Africa as well. So that is a key program. That program is a thematic program. This year, we've been largely focusing on energy justice, food justice, and climate justice. And in that case, as part of this program, one of the key features of this program is to ensure that faith leaders develop local action plans that they're going to implement at a congregational level, which means that that also involves working with communities, working with green champions. So that's our flagship program that we use to drive mobilization, build capacities, and also strengthen community and faith voices around environmental justice issues. So that's the first step. The second step is that we work with communities. So part of the programs faith leaders and green champions do is to roll out programs in their community's environment. And when we are fortunate, we're able to give our faith leaders small grants to run projects on the ground. As part of the Energy and Climate Justice Program at the beginning of the year, we had small grants in the energy and climate justice space, where our focus was we initially had a fleet in March, faith leader environmental advocacy training. And as part of that, we said we want to put theory into practice. So we gave a few faith leaders small grants to test how theory is actually practiced in communities. And the focus was largely on just transition and also renewable. An aspect of that was renewable energy. So faith leaders were training their communities, they were training their congregations around what does it mean to be active agents in a just transition? What does renewable energy look like for a church setting? And how can we involve communities in the conversation so that we leave no one behind? So we use such platforms to ensure that faith leaders and their communities are part of the conversation. But also another lever that we use is policy. We also work, especially the Energy and Climate Justice Program, is focused on policy. We recently trained in the Northern Cape and in Cape Town faith leaders and green champions around Eskom's application to extend Unit 2 at Koeberg, so their long-term operation license. They wanted to be renewed for another 20 years. But the implications, safety implications around that, safety and environmental and health implications, because the toxic radioactive waste or the spent fuel from Koeberg is deposited in Falputs. And we've been working historically with communities in Falputs to empower them around what does this mean for them? What does it mean for the environment? What does it mean for the cultural heritage? So over 2 months, I think July and August, we're training, educating faith leaders and getting them to be aware of this issue and what it means for their community. But also we got over 100 written submissions, which we submitted as SAFCEI on behalf of faith leaders on Unit 2. And also we made a submission, but our submission was a legal research-based submission that supplemented the community voices. So we use such levers to ensure that our faith leaders are heard. And what we're trying to also do now is also work with faith leaders in Zimbabwe. We were recently in Zimbabwe a month ago, and 2 months ago we're in Zambia. There is when you speak about agriculture, the just transition in agriculture or in the food program, we speak about agroecology practices, ensuring that small-scale farmers are using traditional and organic methods to farm.
Okay.
So that is the flagship program that Food and Climate Justice Program has been running in moving our faith leaders towards understanding what a just transition looks like in the food and climate justice space. So one of the key issues in Zambia and Zimbabwe is UPOV 91, if I'm not correct. It's a law that says that certain breeder rights for seeds are given to industrial or large-scale farmers, and small-scale farmers, such as some of our faith leaders or green champions, are being excluded from the conversation because that law doesn't give them a right to plant, but also to share seeds amongst each other.
Sure.
So that is causing an injustice in how faith leaders want to contribute to the conversations around it, just transition, but also continue farming because they have to, they have to live. They have
Correct.
to,
have substance.
So that in itself causes an injustice, and part of the food program is to say, how are we engaging with faith leaders on policy issues, and what are we doing about it? An outcome of that is a Gates letter which we've recently launched.
Okay.
Because we're saying to funders, you are funding such practices, but they are unethical, and they do not stand for what we stand as faith leaders and as Africans, because now you're depriving a certain population, large majority of our people, from being able to use seeds that they've used organically for years, and you're introducing organic GMOs, genetically modified seeds into the mix, which messes up our soil, which messes up our health. So those are some of the levers that we use. We use policy, we use our training, but we also, out of our training, we want to see how that looks like on the ground. And so we roll that out in the form of projects and also in campaigns. We use campaigns. I'm currently leading a campaign called the No Faith in
False solutions. I love yes to a just energy transition.
That
I love
is
it.
what we're on now. We are focusing on that, and that speaks to false solutions such as oil and gas and nuclear energy because of the impact that they have on the environment. So faith leaders, particularly along the Western Cape Coast, have been saying that oil and gas, we don't want it. It's not a solution to the climate crisis or the just transition. We want renewable alternatives so that we are able to protect our environment as stewards, and also to take care of our environment, but also to sustainably live. And that's the campaign. We also work around campaigns as part of the levers that we use to mobilize communities and faith communities and green champions.
And I love the aspect that it's not a jaded perspective of you coming from a top-down standpoint, but there's a collaborative aspect in the levers that you utilize, whether it's the grants, whether it's the, support by way of, legal policy reforms that you can also tap into. But I think what fascinates me is the truth that sometimes we find ourselves at the back end of the disproportionate impacts of climate change, particularly in Africa. And if one even looks at South Africa, we see how the stretch and the gap for people that are isolated and on the back end of some of those climate impacts look like are mostly rural communities who then face a double-edged aspect around gender, intersectionality, and poverty. I wonder, where then do you play that role from a nexus standpoint? If we look at poverty, if we look at injustice and climate change, where do faith organizations or SAFCEI see themselves playing that role within that, poverty, food nexus and climate change? Do you see yourselves playing a role there, or how can you sort of buffer the impact at a community level?
Thanks for that. We're currently playing an active role. We've got a project that we are co-leading with SCAT, the Social Change Assistance Trust, which is called RACER, the Rural Action Change Program. And I think it's largely based in Limpopo and Mpumalanga, where we are saying that we're working with these leaders, faith leaders and green champions, to introduce them, largely green champions, to introduce them to issues around discussions around food security, but it's also a funded project. So it introduces the just transition in the context of food security. How does that look like for communities? There's a lot of work that SCAT and SAFCEI are doing in that regard, and they've been doing it for years. So it was quite interesting to see the outcomes of that, how, green champions are saying that through this project, we're able to you make such a great impact in the community. We're able to raise issues around food insecurity, food security, food justice. What does that look like?
Yeah.
So projects like that enable us as SAFCEI to say that we've got a food and climate justice program, and we want to introduce just transitions in that context, but we want to introduce it in a practical way. We don't want to come and introduce it in a training platform where we just speak about it, but we also want to say this is what we're doing. As part of the food and climate justice program, I'm also segueing into it because I work a lot as well with my colleague. We work across the region on a lot of work. I'm part of a lot of WhatsApp groups where faith leaders are showcasing the work that they're doing around food, addressing issues of poverty. So there's a lot of work that, faith leaders and green champions are doing in terms of planting food, showing us how organic food looks like. We do seed swaps as part of our fleet, and the premise of that is to say that we've got a food security issue in our region. How do we address that? What do the organic seeds mean for us as a people, as faith leaders? What is the identity? What identity do we associate with certain food, certain seeds? What does it mean? And how do we translate that into a conversation to saying that we need to protect our environment?
Yeah.
We need to protect our health, because once we eat healthy organic food, it's also good for us, but also it means that there's sustainability in the food that we're eating.
Correct.
So these are the conversations that we have in programs such as Fleet that we're having at this moment. And one of the key focuses, as mentioned before, is that we're focusing on agroecological practices to ensure that we say, and we are steadfast in ensuring that we have sustainable practices when it comes to farming, and in terms of how we also produce our food as faith leaders and as a people. So we have those programs, and much of this lies within the program of food and climate justice, and the program that I lead is energy and climate justice. But we're trying to see how we can transcend the conversations that we have with faith leaders to say there is a nexus between food and energy, and how do we go about that? Because when we converse with faith leaders, instantly when they think about energy, it's electricity.
Exactly.
But electricity is just a subsector of energy. So we're trying to move, perhaps next year in our fleets, our conversations will transcend from just food and energy, but to say that we've got these two critical pillars. How do we merge them? What is the outcome do you want to see? How do we ensure that energy becomes relevant to faith leaders? Because at this point, it's an abstract conversation because they think of energy and they think of electricity.
And it's not entirely their fault, right? Because I think sometimes there's also that aspect of knowledge sharing, knowledge understanding, and education. And I think a lot of it must also be pulled from the work that we do as, climate justice practitioners, to say there's a disassociation with certain terms and understanding, which then links me to my next question. A lot of the work associated with religion and faith is theological. And for someone that's watching that's maybe not familiar with certain terms, you mentioned stewardship, you mentioned conviction, you mentioned calls. What do those terms mean for someone that's not a theologian or someone that's not in the sort of faith-based work? What do some of those terms mean, and how do they inform the work that you do from a values standpoint?
Those words are quite heavy. They're quite important as well because they are taken, especially stewardships, taken from the religious scripts. It's not just Christianity, but also in Islam, they speak about khalifa. And that relates to faith leaders as ethical and moral beings, being stewards, being earth keepers. And it relates to the idea, the concept that we are given all of this abundance by God, but it is up to us. God has entrusted us to take care of that which we have, which is our environment, because we need every aspect of our environment to balance everything. We need the ecosystem that we have to ensure that certain things happen at a certain time. And in African traditional religion, as that's also a part of our network, those things mean, they mean a lot they're significant to how we carry ourselves.
Yes.
So our work is underpinned by the need to ensure that we protect that which we have. And that is why we are always calling for justice in the environmental space. That is why we're always advocating for practices that are ethical and moral when it comes to protecting the environment. That is why in the work that we do, also make policy submissions to ensure that faith leaders are agents of change, but they also have a moral imperative to speak out against injustices, particularly when it comes to the environment, particularly when there are imbalances in the environment that needs to be protected. So stewardship for us is about being earth keepers, taking care. We're entrusted to protect the earth. We're entrusted to keep it clean. We're entrusted to ensure that it functions in the way that it's supposed to function. And it's a huge task because, as I said today in a workshop in a conference that I presented in, that it involves a lot of unlearning and learning because protecting the environment is something that is new to other people. They don't really care about it. I want to throw my piece of paper outside. I want to dump. But it's that whole discussion of how do we unlearn those practices? How do we protect our environment? How do we, within our congregations, ensure that there's accountability when it comes to stewardship, ensure that there are practices, sustainable practices that we introduce, but those are monitored and tracked to ensure that we live by the commitments that we make. And that will give us a stance, I believe, that when we make submissions or when we talk in spaces to say these are the practices, these are the sustainable practices that we're introducing as faith leaders, as religious leaders in our own space, to show that we are stewards, to show that we are practically living out what is in the word. So that is what it means for us. It means we need to earth keep. Our vision and our mission is to ensure that we protect the environment, and that means we have to do a lot of unlearning and learning. And that means that we need to teach one, but also practically each one teach one. But but also practically, how do we ensure that this happens? Because it's not easy. It's really not easy.
It's not easy, and I think, how then do you deal with the opposition as SAFCEI? We realize that we live in a secular state and people have their own proclivities when it comes to religion. How then do you deal with, individuals that aren't necessarily faith-based or even atheist? How do you deal with that level of opposition, even at a policy level, where certain recommendations aren't taken seriously because of sort of this faith and religious backing. How do you manage that?
I think from the standpoint of SAFCEI, because of its multi-faith approach, it's easy to convince and persuade each other using religious prescripts, and also the work that's been done on the ground, the work that SAFCEI has been doing, also with partner civil society organizations such as Project 90 by 2030, the Green Connection, and now Natural Justice, which is helping us around introducing legal rights awareness amongst our communities.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, it's not difficult to mobilize, coordinate our views around particular issues. Where we have a challenge, I think it's at policy level when we make submissions and our recommendations aren't taken, because we do play a critical role. We do participate and get invited in platforms organized by the Presidential Climate Commission. We're trying to get into a space where we attend parliamentary committees so that we understand what's actually happening in the space and help to bring that information back to our faith leaders so that we can have discussions. And just because we are organized in a multi-faith manner doesn't mean that there aren't disagreements. It's good to have disagreements. It's good to have divergent thoughts on critical issues. But it's how we come together to say, how do we harmonize our views and move forward? How do we work together to ensure that at the center of our work is this call for stewardship, is this call to ensure that there is environmental justice, there is climate justice, what are the issues that are related to addressing the root causes of these injustices, and how as a faith do we stand up to say, these are the issues. But I think the most critical thing is at policy level. We've had some wins over the last few years. We've won the nuclear court deal case in 2017, working with Earth Life Africa.
Yes.
Last year we made a submission which was around nuclear energy, and I think the issue was around procedure, which the minister also agreed and retracted. That I think was a promulgated piece of legislation or policy or guideline. But it's ensuring that how do we also move into the space and be known that this is SAFCEI.
Yes.
And when we share our views as faith leaders, let us be heard, because we're bringing a different point of view, from a point of view of being stewards, from a point of view putting across that we are ethical and moral beings. And these are some of the things that need to be considered when you're introducing laws or policies that affect the environment, that affect us and affect our future. Because ours is to say, let's work towards having a sustainable future. And it hasn't been an easy one, but we're still pushing and we're not going to give up. We're hoping to have more strides over the next 20 years as well.
Come on.
So,
yeah. And that's what we want to hear, more strides and more collaboration. But I think the difficulty, and we've had several episodes related to this, is that, this finding of different stakeholders working together for collaboration, and be it public sector, private sector, civil society, has really enforced the urgency of climate action, climate justice, and JET. And even if we take, JET as an example, the reality is that we have to decarbonize. There's no going back. We only have one Earth, and we're moving towards a varied renewable energy system that's efficient. But there's still people that are holding on to, fossil fuels with their teeth and their nails, right? So how then, from a faith standpoint, are you convincingly, bringing them on board with the understanding that you have to unlearn and relearn, but also learn new ways of doing?
It's a very difficult question, because convincing perhaps the private sector or policy legislators is it not an easy task. But we continue doing the work. I think one of the strongest things, or one of the strongest elements that we have as an organization, is our faith leaders. And recently, one of our faith leaders in, I think, Saldanha in the West Coast, they challenged Total, because they still want to drill along the West Coast, but that's affecting the West Coast. So they've recently submitted, working with Natural Justice, we helped them put together. They came with the submission, but we helped, enhance the document to ensure that there is a sound argument towards ensuring that their voices are heard. So we have faith leaders that are saying there are these processes, we're happy to participate in them because this is our call. We want to protect the environment. We have to protect the environment. But the challenge is the private sector and government. We are collaborating in various spheres. We work with academia and think tanks, but we're just struggling to just find semblance with government and private sector to say, as faith leaders, this is what we're saying. And it's difficult when profits are prioritized over people, and that's what we're seeing at this. That's why we are so steadfast in saying that we are environmentalists, we are environmental justice warriors. But this whole, this whole tension that, if I'm for lack of a better word, that we can't see eye to eye, for instance, with government or the private sector, because this is prioritization of profit over people, is a grave concern. And that is one of our pushes. In the past year, I've been involved in conversations and work with different civil society organizations where we're working on an illustrative people's energy plan. So
Okay.
it's what the people want to see in an IEP, and what does that look like. So we've been coming together, trying to ideate around what does this look like, what are the modalities. But from that point of view, saying that it mustn't be technical, it must be people-centered, it must be bottom-up. So how do we introduce such conversations into government, to policymakers, when there's a limitation in time because of the parliamentary program, as well as there's a limitation in terms of understanding what are these people bringing to us.
Yes.
They're bringing something totally different. This is the direction that we're taking, and we want to steer towards this direction. So there's a lot of work that we're doing as civil society to ensure that not only faith voices, but marginalized voices are included in the conversation, and that people aren't left behind. And we're bringing practical solutions. We're not just complaining and taking government to court and protesting and holding vigils, but we're practically saying these are some of the solutions that we want to bring forth, so that you consider these things in policy documents such as the IRP, which is recently published. That's another topic for another day.
A topic for another day altogether.
But I hope that we can have a conversation around the illustrated IUP, integrated energy plan, that we've put together, and I'm glad that you're also part of some of those discussions, Sinhle. So that's the tension, is that it's difficult finding synergy and work with the private sector who are pushing profit over people, and we're saying people must be at the center of this energy transition, of this just transition.
And I think there is a middle ground there, but the difficulty is, again, this values notion that you bring forth. And I think there's an opportunity for SAFCEI there, to say, how do we galvanize it from a values proposition, and not necessarily who's getting the most rands or who's getting less, exactly, but from a value standpoint, in making sure that justice is embedded as part of that process. And it's difficult work.
It is.
We've experienced how difficult it is, but also so rewarding to see communities also taking shape and ownership of what JET looks like in their own context. And when we do this work in Ntombi, we sit back and it's personal. And sometimes we sit with ourselves from a purpose-led perspective, or from a, this is all I know. And I wonder for you, on a personal note, of course, why this work is important, why it matters, and why now.
Quite interesting, because before I moved into SAFCEI, I never actually thought about faith leaders being agents of change. All I saw is faith leaders being in church or a mosque or a synagogue, preaching the word, and then afterwards praying for people. That's all I saw. But when I moved into SAFCEI and starting to learn what they do practically on the ground, not the theory part is good, but the practical part lightened me. It lightened me. It made me so delighted, because when you go on the ground and you listen to the lived realities of people, you are able to relate to it. You are able to work and co-create and co-design programs with communities and faith leaders. And that's also part of the fleet training that we do. When they develop those local action plans, they present them to us to say, this is what we want to do, and you interrogate them in terms of, do you think this is realistic? How do you want to go about it? How can we help you? So from my perspective, I think what has lightened me, or what has made me happy or delighted when it comes to working at SAFCEI and the work that we do, is the impact that we have on the ground, and how civil society organizations can rally behind each other on an agenda such as a just transition that is inclusive of all voices. In fact, a people-centered just transition. So that has enlightened me. How civil society also works together to support each other is integral to ensuring that there's impact on the ground. And what I love about the space that SAFCEI works in is that it's a bottom up. It's not a top down. It's a collaborative situation or a setup that we have. And some of the the proactiveness is not necessarily from us. It comes from faith leaders to say, this is what we want to do. This is related to food. This is related to climate. Can we practicalize this? Oh, I went to this conference and I represented SAFCEI and I shared SAFCEI's journey with me. So we're able to learn from people's journeys as well, that I've been in SAFCEI for 2 years, but within these 2 years, this is what I've done. So faith leaders are incredible. Green champions are incredible, and they do incredible work on the ground. And this is such a special niche to operate in, because faith leaders are a lever themselves, lever of change, and they can be used to, their value proposition is how they see the world from an ethical perspective, and they bring that into the space that we work in. So it's multi-pronged. It's the impact, it's the passion, it's the learning, it's the unlearning, it's the shared learning space that we have, as well as the divergent thoughts that come through when we engage with faith leaders, and the lived realities that we experience when we go on the ground. So it's not talking to someone on the phone and you hear, or having a Zoom call with them. It's being on the ground, going to the Northern Cape, going to Namakwa land, and experiencing how they are experiencing the radioactive waste from foul pits. It's going to the West Coast and seeing how people are living who are dependent on fishing. And if drilling happens on the coast, how does that look like? What future do they have? What are the current implications or impacts of the industrialization that's happening in the area? So for me, it's the impact. It's what delights me. It's knowing that at the end of the day, there is, even if it's just a needle movement, there is some movement in the work that we're saying that we want to see on the ground around the just transition, whether in food, whether in climate justice, whether in energy. So that's what fills my heart. That's what nourishes my heart at the end of the day.
Spoken like a true environmental warrior. And I love what you said. You said it delights you. And there's nothing like purposeful work that brings you joy as well. So, Nkosi Ntombi, thank you so much for coming on to Just to Say and sharing so generously about the work that SAFCEI does, but also your personal journey in what makes sense, but also the practical and purposeful work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much for inviting us. It's been a journey. Thank you for this. I've watched some of your podcasts, loved every bit of it, and continue doing the good work. Continue bringing conversations around the just transition and also climate change to the people. Thank you very much.
Nkosi, thank you so much. Thank you. And that's a wrap on Just to Say, the Climate Justice Sessions. Thank you so much for joining us on this fascinating episode of the role of faith, religion, as it comes to climate action and, more importantly, climate justice. My name is Sinjanelle, and remember to like, subscribe, and comment, and also share your ideas on what you'd like to spoke about in the next episodes. Thank you so much, and see you in the next episode. Da, 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 da.